Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Annie GRC. I was deported from the United States in 2018 as a green card holder for committing crimes of moral turpitude. I've been sharing my story with you guys for the last 5 years, and today we're going to get into a series titled Exposing Deportation Stories Across TikTok.
Kearns woman already charged with forging checks. Trucking company is now facing charges that she illegally billed customers of another company. Prosecutors charge Ana Garcia with communications fraud today.
I first want to preface this by giving context to the importance of platforming deportation stories with real context, particularly deportation stories that are featured across national news media, both nationally and internationally. Through my time on social media, I've connected with multiple content creators with similar deportation stories, self-deportation, and we have all joined in this movement to showcase life in Mexico, life after deportation, and the opportunities that we have as Mexican Americans returning to rebuild here in our home country. There's a huge importance on this movement, particularly with the current political climate in the U.S., where thousands of families are facing forced relocation back to their home countries. During my time on social media, I came across a lot of stories that I myself have supported as a viewer, as a content, and have even platformed, showcased, and donated personally to some of these stories. TikTok has been a very powerful platform to be able to give awareness to deportation stories, the injustice that some of us have faced dealing with ICE and inhumane immigration policies. Through that, communities have been built through predominantly Latino households that relate to the struggle in one way, shape, or form, and have and oftentimes helped creators like myself through engagement, helping us monetize, helping us obtain employment, personal donations through maybe TikTok gifts, through GoFundMes, for various causes off of the root of our stories and the empathy and sympathy that these communities have given to us. As content creators with platforms, particularly when we are representing deportation stories through national news outlets, context is very important. Context matters. Today I'm going to go into my first episode, and I will be showcasing a content creator that I have personal experiences with. The first handful of these stories I have personal experiences with, and I personally have been taken advantage of both financially and in other ways by receiving stories that were a misrepresentation of what actually happened, concealing the history and at times criminal convictions. As a content creator that has been advocating for these stories for the last 5 years, this movement has been very personal to me, particularly as somebody that worked very hard to open the door to bring awareness to these stories, to give voices to those living in the shadows that couldn't come out with their stories, and to fight the stigma and the shame of deportation. I was deported for committing crimes of moral turpitude in the United States. I committed felony fraud. I was charged, tried, sentenced, and eventually deported. And I've built my channel through the transparency of that and have allowed viewers to follow me with the full context so they know exactly who they're supporting, particularly because I have received financial donations. I have received financial benefit from sharing my story and advocating. So I'm going to introduce Carlos in Mexico. This is a content creator located currently in Puerto Vallarta that I personally worked with through the course of the last year. I'm going to leave the drama out of this because I want this video more to be just factual of the stories and accurately representing his presence in our community, how he arrived, why he arrived, particularly as he was one of the content creators featured in a recent news article here nationally in Mexico as a face of deportation. His story was used by a national reporter to represent the struggle of deportation, the struggle of the immigration policies in the United States, and his story has been presented as one that was forced out by unjust immigration policies. So first, I'd like to introduce to you who Carlos is through his own version of events that he has narrated on TikTok. This playlist was created in February of 2025. In preparation of this series, it was taken down a couple of days ago. It resurfaced yesterday. I don't know if it's still up, but I wanted to showcase from his own words what his story has been to the community. Now, before I show the receipts, as somebody that was Carlos's viewer, supporter, and content creator that collaborated with him, hosted him on my platform, showcase his platform, and encourage some of my viewers to support his platform, I do feel a responsibility to clear up the narration that we were given, myself included, as somebody that personally made financial donations to Carlos's platform through TikTok gifts. And other personal collaborations between us where I invested my time and resources into coaching him to grow his platform. The story that was told to me and my audience in a TikTok live on May 18th, 2025, was he did narrate that he left the U.S. to avoid unjust prosecution at the root of an incident in his hometown of North Carolina that also involved his brother. Hey, Carlos.
What's up, man? I've joined the big leagues finally.
Had your story in depth, so this was a perfect opportunity. Carlos was part of the collab that we did last week, and I heard bits and pieces of the story. Some of you guys may follow him already. If you don't, give him a follow. But give us a quick summary of what brought you to PE.
Well, my story's kind of out there already. I kind of posted it a while back. And essentially what happened was that we worked for a company in the United States. we lived in North Carolina, on the East Coast. And my brother and I worked for a company that was in their county. That's the county where we lived. And while we worked for that company, they did a lot of shady stuff, like very shady stuff, like tax evasion, handling cash, pocketing cash, things of that nature,
Yeah.
And well, it's kind of like a long story, but essentially what ended up happening is they had an audit, and when they started to audit the business and realized that there was money missing, they wanted to pin everything on my brother and on me. And so when we found out, because my brother was actually the one that got approached by a detective at first, and then they started blaming him that he had stolen X amount of money, that they had proof. This is what they said, that they had proof and that they knew what he had done. So obviously my brother right off the bat started denying what had happened and said, I didn't do this. I have nothing to do with this. And he had just had his baby. And so the detective did what a detective does. He started saying, well, if you're not honest with me right now, we're going to lock you away. You're not going to see your child for, a long time. And started, doing what a detective.
His brother is part of this, of these charges, of this case. He is also a content creator that I will be looping in for the sole purpose of providing clarity to all the events that eventually resulted in Carlos returning to Mexico. So we were told a story that he left the U.S. to avoid criminal prosecution because he was being targeted by a powerful family in the United States and by a greedy company, is the way that I interpreted. Like a big corporation was after him in a small conservative town, so he left to keep his family together and avoid being wrongfully accused. So now I'd like to introduce to you his version of events.
I wasn't deported, but it wasn't in my intentions to move back to Mexico. It wasn't in my intentions to move my family back to Mexico. This is something that I haven't talked about since it happened, and this is going to be tough. But it's time to address the question that everybody asks me. Why did I move back to Mexico? I do want to disclose that I'm not going to talk about any names. I'm not going to name any businesses because I'm going to choose to take the high road in regards to a situation that happened not only to me, but to my brother as well. And it's time to talk about it. The reason why I ended up back in Mexico was because my brother, in the summer of 2023, started to get investigated by law enforcement because of supposedly money that was missing from a business that him and I both worked for approximately 7 years. He was approached by a detective and was told by this detective that the family was pressing charges on him for an amount of money that would be considered a felony charge. And immediately one of the family members from this business that we both worked for called me and told me that my brother had taken X amount of money and that they had discovered it. And I didn't believe it, but that's what I was told. That very same day I got that phone call, I went looking for my brother because he had just had his baby. His son was 2 months old. And I said, "What's going on? What's happening? I need you to tell me the truth." And through tears, he told me that he was getting wrongly accused for taking a some amount of money that he had not taken. And I started investigating with the business owners as to what had happened. And they started telling me that he had taken money and that he had been discovered. I worked in that same business for many, many years, and I knew how that business was operated. As a matter of fact, I was borderline the manager for many years, and I saw the daily operations of how that business was handled. I witnessed how money was constantly mishandled by the business owners. I noticed and I witnessed how unethical they were with their finances at the end of each year. All of the shady things they did behind closed doors, I saw everything they did. And I always knew that if an audit ever came to them, they would be in a lot of trouble. Not only because of the unethical things that they would do, but also from all the fraud that they would commit. And the reason I know this is factual information is because I was the one that committed most of those acts. When I would have to put their documentation together to claim insurance money, and when they would do their taxes at the end of the year for the accountant. So I knew that throughout this investigation, somebody had discovered something, and they were going to try to pin my brother for everything. A couple weeks later, it came to my attention that they had directed all of their attention to me, and the accusations started coming my way. I was shocked and I was surprised because I knew that everything they were trying to accuse my brother and I for was not true. And I also knew that there was no way in hell they would be able to prove the accusations that they were making against me and my brother for the amount of money that they were claiming was missing. This was a business that was unethical. This was a family that was dishonest. And this was a family and a business that exploited all of their employees and all of their workers, from the back end of the business to the front end of the business. And when I talk about exploitation, I mean some serious exploitation. Example, this business relied on my brother and I to run it for 6 years without hiring anybody else. They never bothered to hire extra help, knowing that my brother and I were getting worked to death. Knowing that my brother and I were working hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of overtime that we were never getting paid for. This was a business that gave no f- when I tore my Achilles tendon and had to go through some serious surgery to repair my Achilles tendon. Because at the time that happened to me, I was living in one of their homes that they were renting out to me, and they forced me to go back to work a week after my Achilles tendon surgery. This was the very same business that when a hurricane impacted the area where we lived, I lost everything to a flood. I didn't have a homeowner's insurance because this was a unit that they owned. My wife and I lost everything we ever owned. Everything. And they expected me to go work 2 days after that storm. You know, when we immigrate to the United States, it is ingrained in us that we go to the United States to work, and that no matter what, that is all you're ever supposed to do. And I gave that business everything I ever had in me. And I neglected my family to please that family, to make sure that I was always in good terms with them, because I wanted them to know how hard of a worker I was. And little did I know that after doing so much for them, just a couple of years down the road, they would turn around and accuse my brother and I for taking something that we didn't take. But instead it was money that was mishandled by the business and unethically hidden from the government. When the accusations came my way, I knew I ran the risk of being wrongfully accused and being a DACA recipient and running the risk of having felony charges penned against me meant one of two things: falling victim to a judicial system that has historically wrongfully convicted innocent people at an incredibly statistical rate, or relocating our family in a different country. And when I talked it over with my wife and we discussed our options, we both came to the agreement that relocating was the best choice for our family, so I wouldn't have to run the risk of being wrongfully convicted and possibly having to only be able to see my kids through visitation or a glass door. And throughout the course of what was happening, I reached out to a friend who was an immigration lawyer, and I was informed by my friend that when an immigrant gets arrested in the United States and gets processed through county jail, ICE is immediately notified, and it is at their discretion if they want to pick up somebody or not and take them to the detention center. And all he could advise me was that there was no guaranteed outcome for an immigrant and the court of law, which was ultimately a deciding factor when it came to making the decision of moving and relocating back to Mexico. And that is when I had to make the decision of whether to stay there and prove my innocence but run the risk of deportation, run the risk of being wrongly accused of something that I did not do, or come back home on my own terms. This was a community that I lived in for 23 years. A community that I poured time, hours, tears, sweat, and blood into the kids of the community through coaching, through community service. There was a community that I built a successful six-figure business from, that was able to provide a service that everybody was happy with. And this was the same very community that I had to pack my bags from one night to the next and say goodbye. I thought that I had a lot of people in that community that loved me for who I was. I remember the last night that I was in the United States of America. By the time things had settled a bit, I had already landed in Mexico. And obviously I was a wreck, because from one night to the next, my entire life flashed before my eyes. I was away from my kids. I was away from my wife. And I had to say goodbye to my brothers, my mom, and my dad. That was on a Sunday. The next day, my brother got arrested and got thrown to jail. And he was told by the family and by law enforcement that he didn't have anything to worry about. They were going to work things out. And I knew from the minute that that had happened that my brother ran the risk of being wrongly accused of something he didn't do and ran the risk of getting deported. And I felt helpless being in Mexico as he was locked up. And I knew that when an immigrant gets locked up in North Carolina, they are always considered flight risk, and bonds are nearly impossible to come to an agreement to. And so my brother, who had been locked up for 2 weeks without a bond, was finally given a bond. And when it was finally paid, after 2 weeks, had never been convicted of anything, just accused. He was taken by immigration. And after immigration had him, a week passed by, and they added an additional charge to my brother to bring him back to the county. Now, to all my Mexican Americans and Mexicans that know about the immigration system, you tell me, how often does that happen for immigration or ICE to release an immigrant back to the county? Some shady things were happening behind closed doors because of this community that was so tight amongst elected officials, members of the community, and members from the sheriff department who wanted to pin their unethical business practices on us. And so my brother was taken back to county, and they slapped an additional charge and made his bond $500,000. The alleged money that he was accused of was $1,200. And that was the total sum from 4 different charges that they quote unquote had proof from that he had taken. Yet the Facebook post that was made told an entire community that my brother and I had taken more than $500,000 from this business. When he was brought back to county, my mother went and paid his bail a second time. And we should also let it be known that the bondsman that helped my mother both times to try and bond my brother out let her know and told her that he had never seen that particular county go so out of their way to keep somebody incarcerated for a non-violent crime when they reduced it from $500,000 to $15,000. And my mother and I and everybody in our family was looking forward to him getting out because it was like a blessing that ICE had released him back to county and that they had given him a bond so he could be released back into the arms of my mother, his son, and his fiance. And when my mother paid that bond, the county personally drove my brother back to immigration. And they didn't allow him to be released back to his family. And they took my brother in a vehicle and handed him over back to ICE. And when he arrived back in ICE, they told him that they were not expecting him back. This county hand-delivered my brother back to ICE. And a few months later, he was deported. And to top it all off, after he landed in Mexico, after he was in prison for 5 months, they dropped all of his charges. Yeah. All of his charges were dropped. He was never convicted of anything, and he was deported. And I knew that was going to happen to me, which is why I told him that we needed to leave, because we had no chance to fight against that family, that business, because of the power they held in that small community. And my brother was so optimistic that he would land out of everything fine. And he ended up back in Mexico with me. It was tough. When I landed in Mexico, I went through a very tough depression. I lost everything. Everything I had worked for, everything. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to so many people that I was so fond of, because I felt like I needed to leave before they did what they did to my brother to me. And everybody thought that I abandoned my family. Everybody thought that I abandoned my kids. And it was tough, man, to be away from my kids for 4 months. It wasn't easy. And I tell my mom that, had it not been for my kids, man, had it not been for my wife, there's a chance that I wouldn't be in this world right now, because it was a dark, dark time in my life. And it was so sad to see so many people turn their backs on me without really knowing the factual information of things that had happened. But that is why I've become so hard, and it doesn't faze me when people talk about me anymore, because I realized that I thought I had the love of an entire community, just to find out that they would turn their backs on me and my family over a Facebook post. By the time things had settled a bit, I had already landed in Mexico. And so after everything that happened, that is how me and my brother ended up in Mexico. I have encouraged him to get on TikTok and talk about his story and talk about what happened to him, because it's not my place to discuss the things that truly, truly happened with his case. But nonetheless, I knew what the outcome would be. And I knew that at the end of the day, we stood no chance to defend ourselves against a community where everybody had such strong ties amongst themselves. Not to mention, it was a very heavy right-wing community. And we just so happened to be 2 Mexican immigrants. And, well, what happened to my brother is a prime example of what would have happened to me too. And the fact that my brother's charges were dropped and he was still deported, and the way ICE handed him back to the county, and then the county delivered him back to ICE, I knew that somebody was involved in that action that took place. I told my brother, and I've asked him, now that we're both here, I say, hey, if I would have left, now that you know what you know, would you have left with me? Knowing now? To everybody that accused me of hiding, accused me of being a coward, accused me of fleeing, an entire community that turned their backs on me. I think I've been pretty vocal as to where I live. Nobody's hiding. I'm certainly not hiding. The only difference is that I didn't allow for a county, a business, and a family to wrongly accuse me and dictate my future under the circumstances that they were going to put me through just so they could get their way. I chose to do it on my own terms, and I came back to Mexico on my own terms. And I would be more than happy in the future to figure out a way to maybe go back to the United States legally and address the situation. But now, it'll be under my terms. And I won't fear the risk of deportation. I won't fear being locked up for 6 months for allegedly taking something like my brother was. I chose to take matter into my own hands and decide my future. Because as an immigrant in the United States of America, I knew what was waiting for me had I been wrongly accused of taking something that I didn't take by a family and a business that exploited me for so many years. And they still exploit their employees because I made very strong connections with the people that work there, and nothing has changed. They still commit the same acts. They still commit the same unethical things, and they're still committing fraud. And as I stated, I won't say any names. I won't name the business because I am a bigger person than that. And I'll just leave it at that. And I'll call my peace with it. Everybody can make their own assumptions. Everybody can have their own opinions. But I will say this. I won't address this, and I won't let this become my identity. If somebody asks me in the future, I'll just summarize it. And I'm sure this will somehow land into the family members that accused my brother and I and the business itself. And just like that one family member that made a Facebook post and then went on to delete it because that family member proved to be a coward when I came out and spoke some truth into the situation. I say this, and I say this with all of my heart. And if you see this, be thankful that I am not a person who holds grudges and resentment. And be thankful that I am not a person who would go on to try and harm your family after all the damage you did to mine. Because remember that I worked there for 6 years. And I've never said this, and I've always wanted to say this, and I'm going to say it right now. If I ever catch any of you continuing to disrespect me or my family, I swear to God I will unleash hell on y'all. Because I know all the fraud that you have committed over the years. And I know exactly how I can prove it.
Okay, so Carlos narrates a story where his brother is, in his words, wrongfully accused, deported after he's been imprisoned for months. His family had to pay double the bond, and eventually he was still deported as a DACA recipient, although he was not convicted of a crime. Carlos then says that once he saw what happened to his brother, he made the decision with his wife that he would leave to Mexico voluntarily. It's worth noting that he did not, face any type of criminal. That he did not face any type of processing. He did not go to court. This case has not been adjudicated, so it would be really difficult for us to know if he's what the charges or if he's guilty. I personally, in light of recent events, I personally have submitted a criminal records request to Dare County to see what the root of these charges were, so I could just compare and see if it matched the version of events that he gave me personally and publicly. As of today, Carlos stands by his version of events that he has an active warrant for his arrest over a $900 case of, I believe, theft. I personally have not been able to confirm this through public records, and I was going to wait to make this video to do so. And I was also searching for his brother's records because I knew that they were intertwined. Okay, so Carlos has made a heavy, Carlos has emphasized in his version of events constantly, not just in that series, but that the community that he lived in was, had an influence of a very powerful white conservative family, and that this community turned their backs on him and his brother, and it was very heartbreaking because they put their soul into this town. This morning, I received a message from somebody from that town with a different version of events that I felt was necessary to share, and I realized that public records may not be necessary because at the end of the day, there was no judicial process that we could reference to know exactly what happened or who was guilty or not. But it is a fact that through his own admissions that he left the United States to avoid criminal prosecution. And to be, through his own words, he could not risk being detained by ICE as a DACA recipient. He made several statements that, this is a system that has unjustly convicted many minorities, which is true. He detailed his experiences with ICE, his brother's experience with ICE, and I'm not here to defend what the state did or didn't do. I will personally tell you that I have dealt with ICE myself, and I have seen how prosecutors, police departments will collaborate with ICE and can be used to weaponize the system against somebody in personal matters. But the reason why I'm here is sharing this story, and I know there will be some of you that will say this was not your story to tell. You're very correct. This was Carlos's story to tell, but he told us a different story. He lied to us, and on those lies, some of us made donations, some of us made investments, some of us gave support that perhaps we wouldn't have given if we knew the full version of events, or if they were at least not misrepresented. Context is important, accountability is important, especially when we are representing deportation. We are representing a community and a struggle of immigration policies that times are set up to force us out of the U.S. There are a lot of us that have faced injustices at the hands of the immigration system. There are a lot of us that are currently facing injustices and a lot of things, right? But Carlos's case is not one of them. To circle back to his video, the ending of his story time concluded with a threat issued to the potential victims in this case. A clear statement was made: if you continue to disrespect me or my family, I will unleash hell on all of you. I also want to highlight that Carlos admits that there was fraudulent activity going on within the company, and he was the one committing the acts. I think that's important as he narrates this story, that he was being wrongfully accused or prosecuted because there was knowledge that there was some type of wrongdoing, and he admits that he was committing those acts. Secondly, we've been given a version of events that this was a corporation just after him, persecuting him through a powerful white conservative family. The narration matters. The narration matters because it changes when the victim goes from being a large, greedy corporation to a 94-year-old elderly woman. So I'm going to share the information that I received from somebody part of that town, which shows the Facebook post that Carlos referenced in his story, where he said one of the family members that was a coward and posted it and then deleted it. This is the Facebook post he was referencing that gives a very different context to the version of events from the point of view of the victim. So I'm going to read verbatim what the post says and the relationship of the author of this post. And again, this post has since been deleted. Okay, to answer everyone's questions, concerns, and total shock, yes, what you are hearing is true. 2 young men that have been working for my grandmother at the Outer Banks Motel have been stealing money from her for years. Over $500,000 have been estimated stolen as of right now. And saying that these boys have been honored by this community, part of the school systems, have families, and were treated like family by our families forever. Never in a million years would I have believed this is true if it was proven to be true. Very shocking, very sad, very true. One has been arrested, and the other has fled the country and went to Mexico. My grandmother is 94 years old, and no one ever deserves this. I'm heartbroken and I'm shocked and so sad. Please say a prayer for this community and my family. This is one of the most insane and saddest things I've ever heard. My grandmom thought these boys loved her like family. I swear sometimes you wonder who you can really trust these days. I'm not posting this for comments and drama. Trust me, this is not stirring the pot. This is simply putting the truth out there where the truth belongs. This wouldn't be true if they hadn't been stealing from her for years. They created this mess and the truth has finally come out. If you have any arguments or testimonies on their behalf, my Facebook post is not the place for it. One has admitted they were stealing and the other has fled the country. I'm just putting out the truth. Trust me, I would have stood up for them and never believed this was true until we really found out that 100% this is all true. So if you're thinking to yourself, what? No way, not those boys. Yep, that's what we thought too. Very sad, very true. I want to reiterate that I am not judging if this is true. Because I myself committed a similar type of crime, in fact, multiple times. I was convicted for fraud at the base of stealing from my employers as well. And if Carlos had shared this transparently with me, there would be no judgment on my end. What I am narrating here is the concealment of the actual truth, the narration and the context of events that were kept from the audience, including myself, that gives it a very different context than the way that he has narrated his story. Now, one of the things that Carlos also reiterates is that this community turned their backs on them. And that was very heartbreaking. As I listened to Carlos's video, as I was looking for clues to try to put this together, he mentioned a very fond friend of his, Tucker Paddock, and shouted him out for always supporting him. I found him on Facebook and also found a public link to a GoFundMe that Tucker dropped during the course of these events that also gives further context to what happened. This community raised almost $12,000 for Danny, which is Carlos's brother. And I'm just going to read and narrate from somebody that was part of this town and those events, what happened. And it's similar to some of the events do match up with what Carlos said. Danny was brought to the U.S. when he was 4 years old. He was accompanied by his older brother and mother. Every time Danny and I ever talked about Mexico and his home country, he never had much to say. Being that he was brought here at such a young age, he never really had any memories or stories to tell about Mexico. Danny had always told me that he considers the U.S. to be his home because that is where he was raised and that is all he has known his whole life. I have known Danny and his family my whole life. Our families have been intertwined for many years. Through our siblings going to school together, playing sports, working together, and growing up around the same time. Over the many years we've spent, we've all became very close, and I consider them their family as my family. Danny is a big part of our small island community. The work he has done for our community has been incredibly positive. Once Danny graduated from high school, he really embraced his love for sports. Since then, has played a role in the school district's athletic department. He coaches multiple school teams, and not only did he coach, but he volunteered as a referee for our local youth recreation leagues. Kids between the ages of 7 to 12. Danny and I also ran a local men's soccer league that raised money for the school's athletic department. He truly believes in supporting the local kids by growing our school's athletic department. Our community, especially the parents of the student he coaches, embraces every minute of it. Danny really has become a loved and well-respected man in our small island community. He is known as a stand-up, hardworking, compassionate, and all-around good guy. He's also my best friend, and I love him like a brother. The amount of laughs, good memories, and fun times we've had in our short time on this planet would equate to what some people experience in their whole lifetime. He gives good advice, he's sincere, caring, and understanding. He would give the shirt off his back for anybody who needed it. Danny might have made a mistake that is still having a hard time being proven to be true. Danny is being charged with 3 felony counts of larceny by employee. All the charges have yet to be proven to be true against Danny. The amount of money that Danny has been accused of taking is around $900. So many rumors and lies have been spread around about this whole case. People have accused Danny of stealing over $500,000. That is simply not true. These lies have torn his family apart, the reputation has been cracked, and people have begun to look at them differently, which is not fair. The fact of the matter is Danny's name and his family are being dragged in the mud over something that has still yet to be proven. When did innocent until proven guilty go out the window? The justice system is working against Danny in a very unfair and unjust way. Danny received a call from the Dare County Sheriff's Office to turn himself in over a month ago. They told him on the phone that if he did not come to Manteo himself, they would come out to Hatteras Island and make a huge scene out of his arrest. At this time, Danny only had the 3 charges against him. Very small larceny charges, which again, have still yet to be proven. He figured he would come home the same day and not have to go through any strenuous judicial process due to the fact that his charges equated to less than $700. Sadly, that was not the case. Being an immigrant, even though he is a DACA recipient, has a child born in the U.S. and a fiancé, does not work in his favor. He is smacked with a $90,000 bond and set to stay behind bars until his court date. We did everything we could to get Danny back home to his newborn child of 3 months and his fiancé. His parents leveraged their house, and I was ready to sign the papers to get his bill paid. They rejected everything and forced us to put up a property with a minimum value of $90,000. None of us have something worth that, and if we did, we would put it up immediately. Danny was informed by the family they would not be able to pay his bond, and he had to wait until his next bond hearing or court date. Some time goes by, and he has his bond hearing. He goes in front of a judge. The judge was baffled as to why Danny had a $90,000 bond on him for less than $1,000 in larceny charges. The judge dropped his bond to $5,000. Danny's parents paid his bond, and Danny is set to be released that same day. He is picked up by ICE and taken to Raleigh, where he is threatened to be sent to Georgia to await trial. They supposedly found a 4th charge on Danny. This brings his total amount stolen to $900. He is brought back to Manteo, where they put a $50,000 bond on him. He has another hearing. The judge laughs in the face of the state investigator handling this case. The bond is then dropped to $15,000. The parents go and pay the bond minimum to finally bring their son home. The mother goes to pick up her son from Manteo after the bond has been paid. She gets to the jailhouse to find out Danny has been personally taken to Raleigh by Dare County. ICE did not come to get Danny, as ICE has 48 hours once the bond is paid to pick him up. Danny arrives to Raleigh to be processed. They were not even expecting him. He was not supposed to be in Raleigh. The next day after arriving there, he is sent to a prison in Georgia. After all of this circus, the family has paid over double in bond fees to what Danny has been charged with allegedly stealing. Think about that for a minute. The family has paid $2,000 in bond fees, yet he's being charged for allegedly stealing $900. How is that fair? This is where the GoFundMe comes in. We are trying to raise money to help pay for the remainder of Danny's lawyer fees, bond, and court fees. This whole conundrum has been a big financial burden on the family. They just want their boy back. Whether he has done what he's being charged of or not, does he deserve to sit in a prison for almost 3 months over $900? Especially after $2,000 have been thrown away in bond fees just for their boy to be moved around to different jails. I personally think this is egregious. What I've always found to be Danny's best trait is honesty. Danny might have made a mistake, but as long as I've known him, Danny has always owned up to and worked to correct any missteps. Danny has never been in trouble with the law before because he has always respected it. Whether he did the things he is accused of or not, it is not for me to decide, but what I do know for a fact is that behind those charges is an amazing father, a man devoted to his soon-to-be wife, and a man surrounded by family, friends, and a big community, for whom he loves and cares for. He is someone who inspires us and a person who we look up to very much. We all know who Danny is, and he's a great person. I hope you will take into account the work he has done for our community and the true man he is. I love Danny and his family and will trust them with my life. And I know I am not alone. So please, if you can help in any way, whether it's donating to the Arellano family or sharing the GoFundMe, it would be appreciated. We just want Danny to be home with his newborn child, his soon-to-be wife, and his community of friends, whom he has called home for nearly his whole life. The community agreed, and they raised $11,690 out of a $15,000 goal. Now, I agree with a lot of these things, that if this crime was committed, it does not make somebody a bad person. You can have a lapse of judgment. There are many reasons why somebody may commit fraud, theft, larceny. I know that because I committed it myself. And the issue here is not that there is a past that exists. The issue here is the misrepresentation of the events to garner sympathy, a following, and support from an online community that had no idea what the actual context of the story was. While Danny is still detained, Carlos fled to avoid criminal prosecution. Now, I am not here again to defend what the state did, because I have seen the way that immigration statuses can be weaponized against individuals with personal issues. But I do think it's important to note that the victim in this case states that they considered these boys family. And so there is something there. And again, that itself is a misrepresentation of the story we've been told by Carlos, that this was a big, greedy corporation that was exploiting their workers in A, B, C, and D. And I'm not here to litigate which side is wrong, but there is an alleged victim and there are alleged defendants in this case. So Carlos fled to Mexico, saw what happened to his brother, and he made the decision to flee. Again, I want to reiterate that Carlos has always presented that his community turned their backs on them. That is not what I see in this GoFundMe. I see $12,000 raised, and it also specifies that the family was out $2,000. So it seems to be that the community supported both of them in their relocation efforts as well. The beneficiary of this GoFundMe appears to be probably their father. I don't know, it's listed. You can check the GoFundMe yourself. I think it's, again, wrong to say that this community turned their backs on them. I have not received the public records for these cases, and I'm still working with their county to get a copy of them. But I'll be honest, I don't feel they're necessary, because regardless of the outcome of those cases, I feel like I had enough information to be able to put the story together. And I did also receive information from somebody local that Danny was used as bait to bring in Carlos, because Carlos was the alleged ringleader or the big fish that had stolen a substantial amount of money, and that Carlos was only responsible for a small amount. So in my perspective, big fish saw what happened to little fish and took off before they caught up to him. Now, some of you, as his viewers, may remember that Carlos has always placed emphasis on how successful he was while he lived in the U.S. He was the owner of a car detailing company or a car wash, something. That's the stories that I was told, and that he was well off. So there are some inconsistencies, with his history in the U.S. This is not a story of somebody that was forced to leave the U.S. due to immigration policies. This is not a story of somebody that faced an unjust system because they never faced the system. We will never know if he is guilty or not, because he didn't allow the judicial system to put him to trial and to show the evidence. They did not allow the victims to have a day in court. The storyline changes when the victim is a small family-owned business with a 94-year-old elderly woman as the owner. I interpreted his story as a big, greedy corporation was after him by a powerful white family. Now, I'm not saying that small towns don't have influential people, and I'm not saying that the state does not collaborate with people and that the immigration statuses are not weaponized. It happened to me, and I believe possibly that it could have happened to them too. But that's not the issue here. It was the misrepresentation of the facts of the case, the misrepresentation of the dollar amounts. Carlos has insisted privately and publicly as of today that this is over $900. The victims in this case claim they were missing well over $500,000. Carlos has stated he was going to be wrongfully accused, but he has also stated that he was responsible for fraudulent acts committed while working there, and he knew they were fraudulent. And lastly, he issued a threat to the victims that he would unleash hell on them through his platform if they continued to disrespect his family or him. I believe this pushed the family into silence, and after they learned that both brothers were in Mexico, they took their loss and moved on because there was nobody to prosecute. That is my personal opinion. So now it brings me to current date. How do you feel about Carlos being placed as the face of deportation? This is somebody that was not deported. This was somebody that watched somebody else be deported. Yes, this was somebody that was impacted by the system through their relationship to their brother who was deported. And I'm not minimizing Danny's experience with ICE, the state, or his deportation process. But Carlos, which is the root of the focus of my video, Carlos does not fall in line with a deportation story. Carlos does not accurately represent the struggle of deportation or an unjust system when he never faced it. Context matters, especially for these stories that are representing the struggle of deportation, the struggle of injustices and immigration policies that do need reform. Context matters so viewers can make informed decisions on where their money goes, who they are supporting, and what they stand behind. Myself as a viewer, I do look at this story a bit different with context. And I do feel like I was misled to believe that he was a victim of the immigration system. He was the victim of a powerful conservative family in a small town. He was a victim of a greedy corporation that exploited him as a worker. And that is the way that his story has been portrayed to date. Again, I didn't feel that the public records were necessary in this case, because this case never was put to trial, and we'll never know if he was guilty or innocent because he fled. I will also share a personal belief and opinion as somebody that has went through the criminal justice system. I have firsthand knowledge and experiences with the injustices, with the way that the criminal justice system is systematically set up to incarcerate minorities. Innocent people don't flee the country in the middle of the night, leaving behind newborn children and postpartum wives. And that is coming from somebody that was facing substantial prison time with a nursing infant that walked into a sentencing hearing, knowing that my prosecutors, the victims, were all recommending and pushing for prison time. I will tell you that Carlos, being a DACA recipient, counted with deferred action against childhood arrivals, meaning he was protected from deportation but lacked legal status. Him giving that up on a whim is questionable, as we know how difficult it is to obtain any type of status. He could have stayed, proved his innocence, as he stated himself that there was no way that they could possibly prove the allegations against him. Yes, he would have to go through a process. Yes, he may have been incarcerated, but his family wouldn't have been uprooted and now living in a foreign country. I won't take away that there is trauma and struggle in this story for all parties involved. And also the alleged victims in the case who suffered a substantial loss. However, Carlos is in Mexico by choice, free will, and was not forced out of the United States through unjust immigration policies. And there are many stories of migrants who are criminalized for their existence in the United States for the sole purpose of not having legal documentation. I will tell you that I have seen stories across TikTok of Harvard graduates that had no choice but to leave. Stories like Carlos are offensive to those that have actually lived through the machine of deportation and the social injustices of the immigration policies currently in place. To close, our next chapter will focus on a very notorious story across TikTok, one of TikTok's most beloved creators, and Life in Mexico, #Life After Deportation representations, by the name of La Guarita 70, aka Candace. We will dive into that story and the false narration that has been presented that is currently exploiting the Latino community in our own backyard.